to let you ladies go.
Okay.
Good morning.
Reverend
Good morning,
Johnson.
Santita.
Hi, how are
Good
you?
morning. Good morning.
Okay, wait a
I
minute.
am well. Huh?
Just keep
Good
speaking,
morning.
Pastor Johnson. Just keep speaking. We're trying to get the
Yes.
sound right.
Okay, I am well. How are you ladies this morning?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Great.
Looking forward to another grand day.
Okay.
Yes.
Sound different.
Okay, so
And a
Pastor
great
Johnson
day it is.
she sounds well to me. How does she sound on
Yes,
the feed?
she sounded great on the feed. Good morning, Pastor Johnson. She sounds great. You sound great. I don't hear any static from your side, but I'll text you if it starts up, and I'll let them know.
I'll try and stay on this. Okay. All right, lovely people.
All right.
Love you, love you, love you. Thank you
Have
so
a great
much
show.
for everything. Yes.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Sure. You have a great show.
Thank you, sweetie.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Okay, Pastor Johnson, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the last bit of a couple of things.
Okay.
In Minneapolis yesterday, they held a family-friendly street festival to honor George Floyd and mark the year since he died. This is AP News.
Okay, and we can hear everything going on in the background, just so that you know.
Here's our Ed Donovan.
Okay.
So,
Told the judge in a Zoom hearing, sometimes justice is blind and sometimes justice is hard of hearing. But if you touch justice, he said, sometimes.
all right, Pastor, I'm sorry. Okay, we have about 2.5. Are you outside, Reverend Johnson?
No, I am not.
Oh, okay.
I'm in my home.
Okay, no, I was just trying to, because there was a little bit of static I'm hearing in the background, and I was trying to find out what that is.
The NASDAQ and the S&P were down 2, 4 points, and 8 points. The latest numbers from Wall Street. I'm
Right, so let me just get that.
This is 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs. And streaming worldwide at WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Now, your WCPT 820 Chicago traffic update.
Right, okay, I'm sorry.
On the inbound Bryan at 75th,
This
crash has cleared, all lanes are open, but delays persist. Starting on the inbound side of Bishopford Freeway at 111, 17 minutes, 8094 to the merge. I-57 it's 15.
Okay.
Delays also starting at 111th. Another Bryan, the travel time 95th to downtown is 22 minutes, and all lanes are open again.
So here,
inbound Kennedy traffic is heavy.
Reverend, you know what I'm doing is the last bit of show prep.
Involving a delivery truck.
Yeah, I know.
So what I'm doing is trying to order my stories, and that changes constantly. Okay, they're still static.
What about now?
What about now, Marnie? Is there static now?
That's about to change. With Allstate, you can save up to 25% when you bundle your home and auto. You know what else you might not know?
Marnie, is there static now?
Before the egg. With Allstate, you can lower your rates, not your expectations. Visit Allstate.com or call an agent for a quote today.
Okay, Marnie, they're still static. Okay. Is it in my microphone?
The media's all over this cancel culture thing, but how are they missing the real cancel culture that's actually happening right in front of our face? The Republicans just spent the last month trying to cancel.
Marnie, call me on my phone. I'm talking to you right now. Just texting is too distracting to me.
The Republicans have been trying to cancel stimulus money or anything to the American.
The Tom Hartman Radio Program, weekdays 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. on WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Look, staying healthy isn't easy.
Okay, Marnie, are you still hearing the static?
Avoiding stress. But a good night's
rest. No,
30.
I can't hear that, babe. I can't. So, it's loud. Okay, that's not good. No, I can't. No. Okay, all right. I'm at
15.
Coming up. Okay, hon. Bye-bye.
10. 5.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Determined, unstoppable, achieving the impossible. We're standing tall with our heads held high. We are victorious.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. I'm Santita Jackson, coming to you from WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, an AM 950 radio, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. I want to talk with you today about the George Floyd Justice and Policing bill. What is the holdup? What is the holdup? We have correctly we're addressing, at least legally, crimes against Asian Americans and people of Asian descent. That's gone through. What about the Justice and Policing bill? It would help everybody, not just African Americans. Whatever helps African Americans helps everybody. Justice and policing. What is the holdup? We're going to talk about that today. And then the infrastructure bill. What's the holdup there? What's going on? And infrastructure is something that we desperately need to have repaired. The American Society of Civil Engineers, they do a report card every 4 years. Last time we were D or D plus. Now we're C minus. That is not good enough for really the world's wealthiest nation. At least that's what we are as of now. So, I want to hear what your thoughts are. Because we're continuing to amp up the military budget. The military gets all the money they want. The rest of us are scrambling for crumbs. What do you think about that? And of course, COVID Q&A with the brilliant Dr. Deborah Holden. And we're going to have good news with Reverend Vicki Johnson. But let me go to some of these headlines so we can get on with the show, everybody. Call me or text me at 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. Hey, Nina. Hey, Jewel. Sending you all much love today. If you want to text me, GWC3 Lawyers is the reason you're able to do that. Chicago, it's already rainy. 79 degrees will be the high. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 66 degrees, mostly sunny though. The Dow closed down 81 points yesterday. The NASDAQ closed down 4. S&P 500 closed down 8. Everybody, we're in the throes of the NBA playoffs. The Clippers, wow, they went down to the Mavs. 127 Mavs, 121 Clippers. The Lakers were triumphant over the Suns, though, 109 to 102. And the Celtics, well, they fell to the Nets. The Nets, can't get it, 130 to 108 over the Celtics. And in Major League Baseball, the Twins, 7. The Orioles, 4. They'll be facing off against the Orioles again today. The White Sox, 8-3 over the Cards. They'll be facing off against the Cards again today. And, wow, Chicago had a clean sweep yesterday. The Cubs, 4. The Pirates, 3. They'll be facing off once again today, everybody. Yesterday, the family of George Floyd met with Vice President Harris and President Biden, and they called for movement on the George Floyd Justice and Policing bill. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill at the anniversary of George Floyd's murder passed without coming to a deal on policing legislation in his honor, though they and the family used solemn occasion to urge movement on a measure to hold law enforcement more accountable. Those at the White House included Floyd's daughter Gianna and her mother, Roxy Washington, Floyd's sister Bridget, and Floyd's 3 brothers and a nephew. It's important to note that George Floyd does have an older daughter as well. So that's very, very important to note. God bless that family. Everybody. What about the Black Lives Matter? Did you know that they really reached the apex of their popularity last year? It turns out, according to this report from the New York Times, white Americans were more supportive of Black Lives Matter following Mr. Floyd's murder, but that sentiment did not last long, as with Republicans and with whites generally. The support plunged, everybody. Plunged. It's Republicans, white Americans. It's very, very interesting. We're in a very different kind of time. Well, America has reached a new milestone. The White House is touting the fact that the U.S. has reached 50% of adults fully vaccinated. you think about that? 50% of adults, they say it's a major milestone, noting only 1% of Americans were vaccinated when Joe Biden entered office in January. Over 1 billion people, though, worldwide are unwilling to get the COVID-19 vaccine, putting global herd immunity at risk. What do you think about that, everybody? 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. This comes amidst this news. The CDC will not investigate mild infections in vaccinated Americans. Gotta ask Dr. Deb about that. What is that about? Should all infections, should everything, since we're still technically in a trial, should everything be observed? Yes or no? Let me know what you think. 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. Did you know that there's a study that shows that dogs can detect COVID-19, COVID-positive arrivals? Yeah, because they're being used at the airports now, using their remarkable sense of smell, which can pick up the equivalent of a half a teaspoon of sugar in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Dogs have already shown that they can sniff out maladies such as cancer, malaria, and epilepsy. Well, guess what? Now, researchers at the London School of Tropical Medicine say that they can also sniff out, if you will, COVID-19 positive arrivals at Heathrow and at their airports. Wow. In the meantime, we're finding out that nearly 500 million people on the planet now have diabetes, though many have no idea. Why do you think that is, everybody? Why do you think that is? And now they're in the works coming out of Sweden. There is a diabetes vaccine that's being developed. Wow, I wonder if that could be life-changing, everybody. What do you think about that? The United States is planning to reopen the Palestinian diplomatic mission in Jerusalem. And let me see. What do you think about that, everybody? What do you think about where are we going to go with the Middle East? I want to know what you're thinking about that. Is it all over? Do we have peace? Do we have quiet? Do we have calm? What is it? It turns out that, when we look at these landmines and explosives all over the world, did you know that 91% of people killed or injured by explosive in global cities have been civilians, not military? That's right. And heat and smog hit low-income communities and people of color the hardest, according to the journal Nature Communications. They found that in all but 6 of the largest 175 U.S. cities it examined, people of color had higher exposures to heat than white residents. Wow. What do you think about that, everybody? 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278, as I bring on Reverend Vicki Johnson. I'm finding this news, Reverend Johnson. This is not good news to me. HBCUs pay 20% more for bonds because investors are less willing to invest in Black institutions. Can you believe that? But there's some other good news. Sierra Leone is now granting dual citizenship to African Americans. Something to think about. I'm good where I am, but you know what? It's good to have options. A lot of people do. What's on your mind today?
That's right.
A lot of people do.
It's good to be here this morning, Santita, and good to be with your stars and friends. So on today, life in the 21st century finds us in constant motion. We are always doing something and never still. There was a time when stores closed on Sundays so that everyone could rest. Televisions ended all programming on the few channels that we had after a certain hour so that everything and everybody could rest. If you didn't make it to the bank by 1 p.m. on Saturdays, you had no access to your funds until Monday morning at 9 a.m. so that you could rest. Now, when we could rest, we are busy doing something, checking text messages, emails, voicemails, attending Zoom meetings, and the like, because we don't want to get behind. Since we are in constant motion, we are not allowing our minds, bodies, or spirit to rest and rejuvenate. And although we are working at maximum capacity, our output is not necessarily what it could or should be. It would be good today if we could purpose in our hearts and minds that we are going to step back, if only for a moment, and allow the Holy Spirit, of whose coming we celebrated on this past Sunday, called Pentecost, step back and allow the Holy Spirit to comfort us, to teach us. And as Jesus said in the 16th chapter of John, the Comforter will guide us unto all truth. As we seek truths about the injustices we are faced with daily, when we step back and allow the Comforter to do the assigned work, truth will be revealed, and it will allow us to take a much needed break. And to me, that's good news.
Amen to that. Thank you. You know, there was a time when you really had to budget because you couldn't run out of money.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Or have a good friend that you could borrow something from. That's right.
Kept your relationships a little bit. It was a little different. You could borrow sugar from people. Thank you for that. I mean,
that's right.
We forget about that we used to be a much more, I think it was a lot saner. It's a lot saner. Now we don't stop. And you're supposed to stop and rest.
That's right.
Thank you for that.
That's right.
Thank you for that. Thank you. We love the brilliant Reverend Vicki Johnson. Reverend Johnson, how can we hear you at the St. Thomas Lutheran Church?
Well, you can hear us on Facebook Live each Sunday at 11:45 a.m. as we come together virtually to worship. We had one live service Sunday before last, and we're assessing the safety of coming back together outdoors during the summer. So join us on Facebook Live, and I'll let you know when you can come and visit with us in person.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Everyone, Reverend Vicki Johnson, the pastor of the St. Thomas Lutheran Church here in Chicago, one of the few women who's pastoring a church in all of the United States. We're so honored to have her with us on the Santita Jackson Show, sending her much love. And we welcome to the show Dr. Deborah Holden, brilliant epidemiologist, world-renowned epidemiologist. She is the Associate Dean of Public Health at Michigan State University. I can hear a lot of static in the background, Paul. But Dr. Deborah Holden, how you doing today?
I'm great. Good morning, Santita. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I think that there is some good news. The White House has touted now that fully 50% of American adults are fully vaccinated. What does that mean?
Well, we're inching our way towards the goal, which is to get a lion's share of the population vaccinated. And I think with the stall, what we started to see is we've gotten much more aggressive about dealing with the issues, structural, systemic, related to inequity in vaccine administration. I was reflecting on some of the earlier conversations that we had on this topic, and I thought, man, I remember when the vaccine first came out and people were stuck on wait lists. People who were eligible were having a terrible time getting it. Remember all the vaccine parties where the wealthy were somehow getting access to, cartons of vaccine and vaccinating all their friends and making memes and TikTok videos about driving into the hood to get vaccinated and things like that. And it's a funny phenomenon because a lot of the very people who were overlooked early in the process are now the very people who say, man, I'm okay. That's all right. Not in a big rush. I'll just wait for enough other people to get vaccinated and I'll be good. And so, it's a victory. It's a small victory. But what a different time that we're in, and what a profound opportunity to really have a truth-telling moment about how we have just so inequitably taken care of our nation and our nation's health.
Everybody, I want to hear from you. Are you vaccinated? Are you among those who are skeptical? not just hesitant, but skeptical, or who just say, you know what, I want to get my immune system together. There are a whole lot of reasons for that. But now we've reached a new milestone, and this comes amidst this news that there's a poll that I got out of Fox New York. You know that a recent Gallup poll estimated that more than 1 billion people across the globe are unwilling to get the vaccine, and they said that that is a threat to global herd immunity. What would that mean?
Well, we'll start to see things like in some countries are doing much better in their vaccine, their virus and pandemic mitigation response. And so what we're going to see is this will start to divide people. You'll start to see more travel bans. You'll start to see more restrictions. You know, we had talked about vaccines and how different countries, based on, prevalent diseases in their country or in their region, require, the U.S. requires people who are traveling to those countries to have certain vaccinations. Well, we're going to see that going both ways now. There are going to be a lot of countries that won't let you in if you don't have that vaccine passport. And then there'll be a lot of countries that won't let you come back if you haven't been vaccinated before you go, right? So there'll be places where if you go, your country might not let you back in if you're not vaccinated. So, which is an interesting phenomenon because we've experienced travel and the freedom to move about as a right, not a privilege. But in this era, people will start to experience it as a privilege, something that you have to earn, something that has conditions attached to it, and something that will be a rate limiting factor on people's ability to move about and do what they choose to do. I think that's where we're headed. And it's going to be unfortunate because it probably and predictably will pose the heaviest burden on countries who are already economically distressed.
Because they don't have access to the vaccines. You know, these intellectual properties have not been relaxed. That is to say, we can't share the recipes. And, there is some pushback from the wealthy countries are pushing back on sharing the recipes to the vaccines. And some people have said that it would be dangerous to share these recipes. Do you agree with that? What would be the dangers in sharing the recipes? Because, for example, in India, that's where a good chunk of vaccines are made for the global community.
The problem is that if you give somebody the recipe, so you've ever, had a recipe for, making a cake from scratch. And let's say you're home and you go to bake your cake, and then you realize you don't have baking soda. And I'm not a baker, so this might not be the best analogy, but I'll try. Okay. Right? So, if you don't have baking soda, they say you can use baking powder and you add a little salt or something like that. The concern is we also have a global supply chain and supply issue around a lot of what's needed to mass manufacture these vaccines. And of course, that is inequitably distributed, that problem, right? So the thinking is if we let me just say this first. We know there's just the profiteering of it, right? If you give people the recipes and they now can make it themselves and they have more self-reliance and they won't have to pay to be able to take care of their people. But the other argument that's been made is that people will, adulterate the recipes, adulterate the formulas, and try to make a cheaper mousetrap. And that if they do that, that potentially there's more harm to the people. And my solution to that is we also need global sharing of resources. We saw this with the COVID testing need. We didn't have enough reagents. When they do those swabs, you don't just stick a swab in saline. When you swab your nose, you've got bacteria, fungus, whatever. You might have another virus, a common cold or whatever. That swab is going in a solution, oftentimes that'll have an antifungal in it, an antibacterial, some kind of saline solution, other things. There's a whole lot of materials that are needed to manufacture these products. People were literally reverse engineering mouth swabs as nose swabs. because we ran out of nose swabs. So there's a global supply problem in that the big guys, have most of the resources.
Yeah,
so the thinking is if we give them the formula, they'll adulterate it, they'll cheapen it, and potentially, people won't be getting the full benefit. And my solution to that is, well, we need to share and be good stewards of resources.
Well, see, and that's my point in these last couple of minutes here, Dr. Deb. I mean, my pastor, Reverend Clay Evans, God may he rest in eternal peace, said, I've never seen God make a mouth he couldn't feed, and I've never seen God give you a vision without making provision. You have some greedy people and greedy countries. We're hoarding resources that could save the rest of the world, whose resources, by the way, make us wealthy. I mean, there's a study that showed that since 1960, the Western countries, the European countries, of which we are a part, have taken $152 trillion of wealth. I mean, that's where, we can't have cell phones without Africa. I mean, on and on and on and on. So in the last minute and a half, where do we go from here?
Well, I think this is the time for a real global coming together. I know the World Health Organization has really been trying to push for global equity for a long time across a range of issues. This whole not my problem is going to bite us all in the tail, because the reality of it is people do move about. And if we treat it that way and act as if the truly underserved and the countries who don't have the capacity to rapidly and effectively with high fidelity manufacture and distribute and administer their own vaccines, if we don't see that as our problem, it will ultimately become our problem. So, this is the time for global unity. I mean, this is like what Rainbow Push Coalition, is all about, right? And so that's the work that needs to be done. And goodwill isn't enough. Goodwill, what people, the well-meaning folks talking about it isn't enough. This is where those who have need to bear the responsibility of making sure that those who don't are provided for and taken care of. If we don't, what we'll see is we'll start to see normalization and kind of a return to normal in certain parts of the world.
15.
And then we'll be in this never-ending cycle of periodic and random
10.
surges that'll be coming from countries who have never been
5.
able to fully get their needs met during this pandemic.
Think about it, everybody. We've got to share. You learned that in kindergarten, didn't you? Thank you, Dr. Blue.
We so did.
Dr. Deborah Holden, Associate Dean at Michigan State University, Public School of Health. Going to be talking about war, spending, and infrastructure. Do you have to choose between war and bridges in the United States? Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show. Thank you, Dr. Deb. Did you get my email?
I did.
Okay, just let me know if that works for you.
Yep, it was good.
Okay.
It was good.
I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Honey, because, I'm on my way out of town. And so my mind is elsewhere. But I was trying to get
Remember, just one mask. Just one mask. We're gonna have you wear one mask. If you insist on your decorative mask, no more than 2, okay? We need you to be able to breathe while you get a little bit of enjoyment, okay?
Ooh. Okay.
You said okay. Because you're gonna see it. If you're still traveling as we cross that marker, a lot of places, like in Michigan, June 1, mask gone. And so.
No, look, honey, I was in the airport.
We have Mr. Swanson.
And it's just, I'm just trying to figure it all out. And, I'm not paranoid. I just, I don't like being on these planes, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Because I like the train, to be frank with you. So let me just be honest with you about that. But before you go, I want you to meet David Swanson, one of my favorite people. He's the executive director of World Beyond War. How about that? I wonder if that could happen. Huh. What would that be like? We might
It
actually,
should happen.
we might be able to spend some food, get some food for everybody on the planet. How about that? Just housing, shelter, peace dividend. David Swanson. We're on Facebook Live. We're not on the show yet. But how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. This is Dr. Deborah Holden. She's not going to be staying with us long, but she is on the show every day. She's one of the world's top epidemiologists. Comes out of Johns Hopkins, but she has been brought to Michigan State University to build their School of Public Health. So she's their associate dean for public health at Michigan State University as she builds that school. So consider yourselves introduced.
Wonder what you make of the new acceptability of saying that coronavirus may have come out of a weapons lab. I wasn't allowed to say that a year ago, and now I am. It's fashion trends. You know?
But you see how the politics shifted that because people don't like Trump when he said it.
Right.
And I disagreed with that then. I said I don't have to support him to ask, well, where did this come from? But Dr.
Exactly.
We've got about 30 seconds. What do you say about that? Is it important for us to understand the provenance of a virus, where it comes from?
Well, my thing is people need to be accountable. And that includes governments, that includes institutions, and all of these other things. Nobody should be able to operate with impunity. And unfortunately, that's just how our world works. And so I do think, like you say, people need
1 minute.
It's fair for people to understand the origins of this. It would help remedy a lot of the concerns and skepticisms that people have. You know, the truth has a certain vibration, and so does a lie. And when you lie to people, they might not know exactly what the lie is, but you know when you're being lied to. You know when you're being gaslighted. You feel it. It has a whole different vibration.
30.
And that's right. And we felt that vibration last year. Thank you, David Swanson. Thank you, Dr. Deb, because that's what we felt.
Yeah.
And I said, what's the problem? I don't have to like him to ask that question. What?
15.
If it escaped from the lab, we need to know. We need to know. We need to know.
10.
Need to know whether this, because now even Fauci's saying, well, perhaps, okay.
5.
You all knew that last year. Yeah, you did. Yeah, I've said it, David Swanson. They knew it. They did. Oh.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Wednesday, Hump Day, May 26, 2021. I'm Santita Jackson, coming to you from the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, WCPT 820 in Chicago and AM 950 Radio, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and all over the world. I want you to meet up with my morning stars, Samantha and Jewel and Big Bree 65. Oh, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. We've got our brothers and sisters from Brazil tuning in, from the continent of Africa. We've got some people coming in from Europe. It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And Dave up there in Canada. So many of you, please continue to like and share. Of course, I'm on the Santita Jackson and Friends page and WCPT, their Facebook page as well. And you can also stream on my new YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show. Please like and subscribe there, everybody. All right, let's get to it. You know what? We're looking at the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We're going to talk about that at the top of the hour. Why has it stalled? What's the issue? Well, what are the issues with infrastructure? And infrastructure is a big, 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 big deal. I mean, it's our bridges, it's our water, the clean water. We've got a lead problem, not just in Flint, but all over the country. We've got bridges that are breaking down in New York City. I mean, all over the country, everybody. And, well, we've made some improvements because 4 years ago, the American Society of Civil Engineers, well, they give us a report card. 4 years ago, we were in the D range. Now we're C minus. So that's an improvement. But is it really? I mean, look, they're saying that it's going to take $5.9 trillion to make America's infrastructure safe. 5.9 trillion with a T. And yet, it seems that the military has this limitless budget. They're able to get money without question and spend without question. And so David Swanson, the executive director of World Beyond War, said that the president's announcement that Trump got military spending just right is dead wrong. And he said, President Joe Biden is proposing a level of Pentagon spending so close to that of Trump's last year in office that Bloomberg calls it a 0.4% reduction, adjusting for inflation. In other words, it didn't move at all. Wow. What do you say about that, David Swanson? Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Santita. And it's worse than when I wrote that because it's very clearly an increase. Biden wants more money for the military than Trump. Not a whole lot more, but it's. I mean, it's more historically than almost any time in the history of the United States. People remember Lyndon Johnson wanted all these great social programs, and all the money was going into the war on Vietnam, and it was such a disaster, and he couldn't find the money, right? There's more money right now going into the U.S. military than during the war on Vietnam. They're killing fewer people with it, at least directly through military violence, and that's a wonderful thing. But it's more money, and it does incredible amounts of harm directly and indirectly. It kills more people through the diversion of the money away from where it's needed than through the military escapades.
Everybody, what do you think about this? Should we have to choose between the infrastructure or military spending, or what should be the priority? I think that's the better question, David Swanson. Our infrastructure, our bridges, clean water, and on and on and on. Is that a greater priority for you than military spending? Now, mind you, with all the military spending that we're doing, we're not giving it to the troops. They don't make any money. There are payday loan centers on the edges of these bases. So the troops, the enlistees, and their partners and husbands and wives and their children, they're struggling. They're struggling. So I don't even know where this money is going. But, I mean, do we have to make a choice, David Swanson? I mean,
well, we darn well ought to make a choice, and you're right. I mean, they make us hold fundraisers to support the troops because it builds more support for the troops, and the whole pretense that military spending is about the troops. But it's largely for private corporations that engage in incredible waste and fraud, and it's a means of moving the money upward to the 1% from the rest of us, and it's an economic drain. People think, well, at least it's wonderful for our economy and creates all these jobs because my neighbor works for a subcontractor, but it doesn't. You spend the same amount of money on infrastructure, on energy, on education, or even you don't tax it from working people in the first place, and you get more jobs. So the military spending actually eliminates jobs. Wow. Destroying countries, destroying the environment, creating homelessness and refugees on a mass scale, killing, injuring, traumatizing, fueling racism and xenophobia, and by the way, diverting money that could have been used to transform everything. You don't have to pick infrastructure. The whole world and the United States could be absolutely transformed for the amount of money we're talking about.
We're talking with David Swanson, the executive director of World Beyond War. I mean, what would that look like? I want to know how much of our budget goes to military spending and China, Russia. I mean, how much are they spending? I remember President Carter said that President Trump called him, and and the presidents do speak to each other. They do. At least typically that's what they've done. Well, at least Carter was open to receiving his phone calls. And President Trump wondered, according to President Carter's recounting of the story, he said, China is really leaping way ahead of us. And why? I mean, how is it that they're advancing? They're just leaping, galloping ahead of us. And President Carter said, we're at war everywhere. They're not. Their money doesn't go to this.
Yeah.
Please explain. Is that true?
It's absolutely true, and I don't have any interest in competing with China. If I have to beat somebody at something to feel good, I'll go play basketball with my neighbor. I don't need, this competition with China to feel like a man, But and I think that a country with many times the number of people ought to have many times the amount of money. I mean, it just makes sense. But there's no question that China benefits from the fact that it isn't waging wars all around the world, and it's spending. I mean, if you take all of U.S. military spending across all the agencies and departments and the debt for past wars and the rest of it, it's at least $1.25 trillion every year, $1.25 trillion every year. But if you take the figure that is generally used for comparisons, where it's around $750 billion or $750 billion a year directly on the military. And you compare it to all the other countries, well, Russia's at about 8%. China, the big evil China is at about 1/3 of U.S. military spending. But if you compare it to the U.S. and its allies and weapons customers, China is at about 14%. And if you look at it per capita, the U.S. is spending $2,170 for every man, woman, and child every year for wars and war preparations, and China is spending $189. This, of course, benefits China, not the United States.
When you say it benefits China, not the United States, what do you mean?
You're taking over $2,000 from every man, woman, and child in the country every year to put it into something counterproductive and destructive and economically draining that benefits certain powerful people and campaign funders. It doesn't benefit you or me. And it's an incredible force of destruction in terms of our society, our morality, in terms of fueling hatred and racism and blowback and domestic violence and militarizing of police and environmental destruction. And meanwhile, China, rather than generating enemies around the world, is providing more actual aid in place of this so-called military aid, and more alliances and partnerships rather than occupations and bombings. I mean, beyond just U.S. military spending, there's the fact that the U.S. government gives U.S. tax dollars every year to just about every other military on the planet. I mean, people in recent weeks have been hearing about the Israeli military, and they're number one, right? They get $3.8 billion every year for their military from people in the United States, from you and me. And people now, this week, just today, people are going to get upset about President Biden saying $5 million for rebuilding Gaza. This is an opportunity to say, yes, $5 million for rebuilding Gaza, but $3.8 billion every year for destroying Gaza is big too, right? That's a big amount too, right? And that's just one out of almost every country on earth, right? 40% of U.S. foreign so-called aid is actually money for weapons. And that doesn't have to happen. You don't have to be arming the world and arming future enemies and then paying for rebuilding and for wars against them. It's madness.
It is madness. I mean, I was reading the National Priorities Project, and I went to their website just, because you all kind of keep me, World Beyond War, you all keep us on point. You really, really do. We're in a pandemic, David Swanson. The Pentagon increases the size of their entire budget. We're in a pandemic. The entire budget of the CDC is the size of not the Pentagon's budget, but the increase that they're getting. What?
Oh, yeah. Which is bigger than Russia's military budget, right? Which is bigger than almost anybody's military budget. And during this pandemic, there have been numerous countries, including Russia, that have reduced their military budget in order to move money to dealing with the crisis in healthcare. Not the United States, not almost every member of NATO, who, of course, were badgered by Trump to spend more on their militaries.
Well, I mean, now he did badger them to spend more on their military. Was he trying to get them to amp their military up, or was he trying to remove some of America's obligations to the military?
Oh, I think he concluded that it was unfair for the United States to be paying so much more on its military and on NATO than other countries. The solution, of course, was not to abolish NATO as a destructive relic that has no purpose, but to beat and cajole other countries and bribe other countries and threaten other countries into spending more on their militaries and on NATO, and to continue pushing, as every president before and after him, toward getting more countries into NATO. This is when they want something to happen, when they want to pass a bill through Congress, they push and they pull out every carrot and stick and threat and bribe. But you'll notice that with the infrastructure bill and all the good bills that are being introduced for show, there's no effort to get rid of the filibuster. There's not been a single carrot or stick applied to Senator Manchin or Senator Sinema. If people are concluding with, the abandonment of all the nice promises on student debt and so forth, that the goal really is to lose the Democrats' seats next year. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but it certainly, looks like it.
Everybody, call me, text me, 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. We're talking with David Swanson, who's the executive director of World Beyond War. World Beyond War. We're talking about our infrastructure. Do we have to choose between our infrastructure and military spending? No. But should we prioritize infrastructure over military spending? I want to find out from you. Because this money that goes to the military, David Swanson, before we go to the callers, it's not going to the troops, the enlistees. Or is it?
According to President Eisenhower, every dollar spent on the military is a theft from infrastructure and from people who are hungry and ill-clothed and ill-fed, and that's never ceased to be true. People think the money is infinite because you can just do deficit spending, and that's fine. I don't care if they come up with the money from elsewhere. But Biden's proposal to pay for his infrastructure is a teeny little increase on corporate taxes that will pay for this one infrastructure bill over the next 15 years, as if we're not going to have to buy anything else for the next 15 years. And they're already talking about all the other things we need to buy, right? And so why not take money out of something that you're blowing over $1 trillion a year on that is completely counterproductive and destructive and deadly?
Anita from North Carolina, what's on your mind today?
Good morning.
Good morning, Nita.
Good morning. Reverend Jackson is always on my mind, and the nonviolence, and that's what saved America so far from all the things that could have happened that could have been destructive. He's continued on Martin Luther King's dream of a real America with real principles of equality for all people. Okay, and people have to work for that. They can't just expect to get things from this country. And no one's listening to Reverend Jackson. He's giving them the best solution. He's saved the country. And no one's listening to him. It's not important. But it is important because when Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. was in office, he was nonviolent. And Blagojevich was on the bank to serve the people right. And that's when they showed up at his home the next morning at 5:30 in the morning and wanted him to be arrested. So they're attacking the officials that are looking for the real solutions that are nonviolent. Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. had a plan to put real jobs and not casinos in the areas where the people did not have economic base. And part of the economic base is because when the Caucasian male raped the black female, he never restored her family. He never showed her how to be married. So that continued to be a bad situation for the black community, and that was never restored. So I think they should do what Elijah Muhammad said. White man, stop raping women. stop going to everybody's country, bringing their people over here and using them as slaves, and make sure that people are looking for the human cause, which is family and children, and making sure women are protected in marriages and not just thrown in the street and used for slave purposes. And Reverend Jesse Jackson has said nonviolence is the best thing, and rape is violent. So I think we need to go with the nonviolent, and I don't need to listen to Israel. Israel gets in too many fights for me. So he must be causing some of their own fighting problems. You don't get in that much trouble without you being part of it. And I'm not going to blame the Germans because Hitler was German and Jewish, and no one ever speaks to the fact that he was Jewish. And until they do, I don't want to hear that everything is a scare for Israel because somebody's German.
Well, certainly we do want to, and I hear you, Anita, and thank you so much for calling today. We believe that Israeli security and Palestinian justice go hand in hand. But it seems that the conversation there, David Swanson, has shifted in the United States because there are more calls for balance and for justice and really for a world beyond war. I mean, I think that Americans, and that was one of the things, Americans are war weary. Whether people voted for Trump or not, there were some things that he said that resonated with a lot of people, David Swanson, when he talked about really pulling us out of wars and talking to people who, even the mainstream media, said he was crazy to talk to North Korea. And I was like, what's the problem? If we can just cool some of these temperatures now, I think that's a good thing. We need more of that. I don't care who does it, David Swanson, because I don't think we're advantaged. We're not safe. We're not more safe with more guns.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think the caller is absolutely right that people need to learn and practice nonviolence, which is the opposite of restraint and passivity and something short of violence, which is the last. I mean, the reason we've seen any progress for Black Lives Matter and other movements is precisely the opposite of restraint. It's engaged nonviolent activism, which is what we need. And we need it to defeat an apartheid state in Israel, which, yes, every Israeli is a human being and everyone should have the same human rights. But we do not need to uphold an apartheid state, a state that openly and explicitly targets people for abuse and murder for not being Jewish. This is absolutely outrageous for the United States to be funding this year after year after year. And of course, you've got complaints if Donald Trump wanted to talk with the leader of North Korea, much more than you got complaints when he was threatening nuclear war against North Korea. And you've got complaints now that Biden wants to meet with Vladimir Putin. But and they're the same, traditional, he's weak, he's a coward that you've had for decades. But they're not, he's going to meet with his secret master, Vladimir Putin, to give him his marching orders. So that madness, at least, we've gotten beyond. Now we have to deal with the traditional madness that we're used to. And there is absolutely nothing to be gained by refusing to talk with people. Biden's getting more criticism for agreeing to talk with Putin than he did for calling Putin names and saying he had no soul and so forth. So we've got to turn this around.
But the paradigm is off, and this is where I'm so appreciative of your work, David Swanson, because you are saying that we can have a world beyond war. You are saying that to really push for peace, that is not a weakness, it's a strength. Dr. King wrote the book, The Strength to Love. It takes a lot of strength to love people, particularly people who don't like you or love you back. It takes a lot of strength to fight for peace. Where do we go from here? Because right now, we're fighting for infrastructure. And in the infrastructure bill, we're talking about caring for giving women and families, mothers and fathers, the assistance they need so they can get back to work. You can't just leave your babies at home.
Right.
I mean, infrastructure there's a lot in this, but we can't get it through. But they're writing checks for military spending right and left, and we don't even question it. And it's not even going to the troops. They are as poor as they can be.
I think we have to come to recognize that what Dr. King called the madness of militarism will indeed destroy us if we don't get out of it. And so we can applaud Senator Sanders for holding a hearing about waste, fraud, and abuse and complaining about expensive dinners and so forth. But if the military spent all of its money on expensive dinners, there would be a lot of men, women, and children still alive around the world. It would be efficient military spending on the planes that do work, that were done through competitive contract bidding and so forth. That's worse. And the whole movement to address sexual assault in the military, that's great. That's wonderful. But murder isn't better than rape. The answer to reforming the military is to scale down and get rid of the military. It's not to do it properly. And we have to come to terms with that we need to put our money into good things that build up humanity and the environment we live in, not destruction and murder.
Not destruction and murder. Everybody, what do you think about that? Well, I hope that you do think about it, because humanity's in the balance, David Swanson. I mean, I've got the final minute belongs to you. What do you want us to know before you go?
Dumping endless, unaccountable money into militarism is why we got this story last week in Newsweek. 60,000 secret Pentagon spies at $900 million a year doing nobody knows what. This is lawlessness, and we are at risk of nuclear apocalypse greater than ever before, greater than decades gone by when people knew about it and cared about it. If we don't shift away from war to a world beyond it, war will take care of that for us. And we've got to recognize that danger. It's the danger of climate collapse, but faster. And if we don't address it, we really are off track and engaged in what Martin Luther King called madness.
Thank you for the work that you have done and that you are doing, David Swanson. World Beyond War. Everybody, I urge you to give them your support. Our lobbyists for peace. Our lobbyists for a sane world. I remember when Reverend Jackson ran for president, the mission statement of the campaign was toward a just society and a more peaceful world. We tend to laugh at people who are seeking peace until it's their time for us to go to war. How about that?
Exactly.
Thank you, David Swanson. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. Blessings to you. Blessings to you.
30.
And you have a home here on the
Santita
Jackson Show. Always come back. Everybody, let's talk about the Justice and Policing Act. George Floyd, it's been a year and a day since he was murdered. And yet that has stalled. And yet more and more are being killed by the police. Every day. More of the Santita Jackson Show on WCPTA 28 Radio. Just a few minutes. Paul, I got a message on Facebook that the volume has dropped and they could barely hear the guest or me.
Okay, I haven't touched the volume. What's it like on your end?
No, I haven't touched anything. So that, so I need you to find out what it is.
Okay, after I get the guests up, I'll look into it.
No, because I'm not touching this.
Okay.
I'm letting you know. They let me know when there's a problem, and that's what I need you to chase down. Okay. All right, everybody. Philip, I hear you, and so we will get to you. Get to that issue in a hot second. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Hey, I can't thank you enough for caring enough to reach out. How about that? I thank you for all of that. It means so much. Let me see this. Okay, let me get that up. Okay. So, okay. Sorry, you guys. I'm trying to get myself together here. But what do you think about the Justice and Policing Act? Do you think it should be passed? What do you think is holding it up? What do you think, everybody? What do you think? Something to think about. Did you know that the increase in the budget for the Pentagon. It's the size of the entire CDC budget. And here we're in a pandemic. Come on, you guys. You know that is nuts. So, let me know if you
We have
hear
Attorney
me.
Fancher.
Okay, perfect. Attorney Fancher. Attorney Fancher.
Oh, yes. Good morning.
Oh, hi. I was speaking to you, but he didn't have you up yet. How are you?
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm fine. Thank you.
Always wonderful hearing your voice.
Likewise.
Always, always. And let me see. And I'm gonna bring you and David Maciosha back on. He really enjoyed engaging with you yesterday, and I think it's an important conversation to have. So,
oh yeah,
I will be going back to you guys. I think it's important for us to have. I think we got to have all these discussions. You see, in Sierra Leone, they've been giving African Americans dual citizenship, and that's been happening all over the continent, actually. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Ghana might have been the first to actually make some moves in that direction.
Yeah. Reverend was working on that with Liberia in 71, 72.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm sorry.
All right, we have Attorney Patillo and Reverend Yeri now.
Thank you. Okay. Attorney Patillo.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm trying to get over the video you sent me yesterday. Everybody, Robert Patillo, I think he's missing his calling. He needs to be on Broadway. He needs to be in movies. Tell me what you sent me that I'm about to post.
Well, sometimes it's hard to find someone on the other side of the aisle to have an intelligent debate with. So I just decided to debate myself. So we made a video debating critical race theory from both sides of the aisle, just with just us.
I just want you to know, Robert was the host, and he introduced himself on the left and himself on the right. He is absolutely nuts. And once I said, "Are you kidding me?" Oh, I fell out. I said, "This is too rich. I love it. Love it." It's great. Robert, you are brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Oh my, this is a bit of a mad scientist. I said, "No, I'm not ready for this," and you didn't even let me know. Oh, yeah, no, I sent it out to a lot of friends immediately. They were like, "Who is this guy?" I said, "You got to hear him on Sundays. He is a nut. He uses words nobody can understand. We just love him. We don't know what he's, but oh my gosh, I just love you to pieces." But you're just absolutely, you're a gem. Reverend Yeri.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, thank you. I'm doing well, thank you. Just in the midst of a lot. Of course, you are on with Mark Fancher, Attorney Mark Fancher, and Robert Patillo, Attorney Robert Patillo. So it'll be a wonderful segment. And as we talk about this, okay. All right, sorry, guys. I'm trying to do a couple of things at one time, shifting these papers around. So now, just make sure that you all are in a quiet place and no shuffling of papers or anything like that. We can hear everything in the background. Let me know. The sound is up now, but there's static, Philip. Okay, there's a lot of static. We are working on that, Philip. Where's the static coming from? Is it coming from the callers and from our guests, Paul?
I was monitoring Facebook. I didn't hear the static. I just heard the volume.
There's a lot of static, and they chased it down yesterday, and they heard it. They even heard it. They were shocked to hear it on the WCPT820.com feed as well. There is static, and the same static that we heard yesterday. I have to let them know because we had a meeting with Jim and Mark and Matt. It's a lot of static, and it's very, very. The sound is back up, but now there's a lot of static. Okay.
Back in 30.
Okay. All right. Okay, Paul?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Okay. 15. Five.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Determined, unstoppable, achieving the impossible. We're standing tall with our heads held high. We are victorious.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station. AM 950 Radio, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and on Facebook and Instagram and on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. I am glad to be with you today. Santita Jackson and friends meet. My morning stars over there, they're just from everywhere, and I just love them to pieces, and you will too. And of course, WCPT 820's Facebook page and the Santita Jackson Show on YouTube. Please like and subscribe there. And of course, I'm on Instagram. Santita J at the Santita Jackson IG, and then Twitter at Santita J. So everybody, please become my friend. Let's talk about the Justice and Policing Act, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It's been a year and a day since he was murdered. It was officially determined that he was murdered by Derek Chauvin, the police officer who had his knee on his neck. But we have several other officers who placed their body weights all over this man's body. So they're going to be tried. But in 2022, that trial has been moved. I'm going to talk about the Justice and Policing Act and why it has stalled. Why has it stalled? What do you think about it? Should it be passed immediately, everybody? What do you think about that? What's happening in the Senate? What's in it? Why has it stalled? 773 763 9278 773 763 WCPT. Of course, GWC Injury Lawyers gives you the opportunity to text. So please call me at 773 763 9278. I want to know what you think about the Justice and Policing Act and the continuing acts of violence against American citizens, disproportionately African Americans and Hispanic Americans, but American citizens by the police. What's going on, everybody? As we heard the calls to defund the police, and really, no one wants to get rid of the police. You just want to reform the police. Well, there's a lot that we're going to talk about with this magnificent panel. Let me get to some of these. Let me go to the headlines, and then we're going to get right to you. Chicago, it's been raining already, but it's a beautiful day. The high will be 79 degrees. Minneapolis, St. Paul, a high of 66 degrees. Beautiful day, mostly sunny. The Dow closed down 81 points yesterday. The NASDAQ closed down 4, and the S&P 500 closed down 8. Well, we are in the midst of the playoffs, everybody. And guess what? The Mavs, they bested the Clippers 127 to 121. And the Lakers were triumphant over the Sun 109 to 102. And the Celtics, well, they fell to the Brooklyn Nets 130 to 108. And yesterday in Major League Baseball, at least as it pertains to the Twin Cities in Chicago, the Orioles, well, they fell to the Twins 7-4. They will be playing, Minnesota will be playing the Orioles again today. The White Sox, well, 8-3 over the Cards, everybody. They'll be facing off against them again today. And it was a clean sweep for Chicago teams. Cubs 4, Pirates 3. They'll be facing off against one another once again today. Everybody, what do you think about this? Over half, now we have reached a milestone. 50% of Americans, of American adults are now fully vaccinated. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? Is that a good thing? Have you been vaccinated? What do you think? Now we're seeing there's a poll that shows that 1 billion people around the world are refusing to be vaccinated. And that means it's going to be very difficult to reach global herd immunity. How will that impact us? Think about that, everybody. And guess what? President Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin will attend a high-stakes summit in Switzerland next month, marking the first face-to-face meeting between the leaders of the United States and Russia. It will be Biden's first international trip since taking office. The White House says the leaders will discuss restoring, quote, predictability and stability, close quote, to U.S.-Russia relations. Now, Manhattan's top prosecutor has convened a grand jury that is expected to decide whether to indict former President Trump should prosecutors present criminal charges in their probe of the Trump Organization, according to the Washington Post. Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance has been investigating this case for more than 2 years, determining whether the company misled lenders and insurance companies about the value of properties and paid appropriate taxes. What do you think is going to happen to everybody? Wow, we'll see. Now, the United States is going to reopen the Palestinian diplomatic mission in Jerusalem. In the meantime, over 500 Democratic staffers have done something we've not seen before. Democratic Party staffers and alumni of President Biden's campaign have signed an open letter calling for the U.S. president to do more to protect Palestinians and to hold Israel accountable for its actions in and over Gaza, where a ceasefire currently holds. 91% of people killed or injured by explosives in global cities were civilians. That's right. According to the Action on Armed Violence report, most people, the overwhelming majority of people who are killed by explosives are civilians, everybody. Did you know that heat and smog hits low-income communities and people of color hardest, according to the National Academy of Sciences? That's right. The proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences had a study that shows that poor and low-income communities, people of color, suffer the most because of pollution. Everybody, HBCUs, wow, pay 20% more for bonds because investors are less willing to invest in black institutions. What do you think about that? Let's get to the Justice and Policing Act by George Floyd. I'm Santita Jackson. I want to hear from you. 773-763-9278, 773-763 WCPT. Why has it stalled? What is in this bill? What is qualified immunity? What can make this go forward and make a difference? Right? We're finding that, according to the New York Times studies, support for Black Lives Matter has actually gone down since last year. That's right. There was we had the feverish, the excitement of these. Really, the first time that we saw the video of this young man who was killed by this police officer, Derek Chauvin, and the others, quite frankly. And so you had a lot of support for Black Lives Matter. You even have Black Lives Matter on the street leading to the White House on 16th Street in Washington, D.C. But that support is now dwindling, and it's actually plunging. It's going down real fast. And so there is pushback on this particular, on this bill, on this legislation. What is it? Why do we need it? I want you to call me or text me at 773-763 WCPT, 773-763-9278. Indeed, President Biden was hoping to have this passed by the first anniversary of George Floyd's killing. It didn't happen yesterday as he met with George Floyd's family. Do you think it's going to happen? What's in this bill? I want to know what you think. And this is happening while the killings are still happening, everybody. That's right. A former St. Paul, Minnesota police officer was sentenced to 6 years in prison by a federal court last week for using excessive force against an unarmed civilian who was a black man during a 2016 arrest involving, he was being mauled by a police dog. This is the culture here, everybody. And yet, he was beating him. Now, he apologized from the bottom of his heart, but what do you think about that? What does that say about the culture? And we have 47 in custody deaths of black people blamed on sickle cell trait. What do you think about that? What do you think about that? We've got a tremendous panel with us today of Reverend Dr. Todd Geary, Esquire, Vice President of Rainbow Push, Senior Pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore, Attorney Mark Fancher, National Conference of Black Lawyers, brilliant civil libertarian, and Attorney Robert Patillo, host of his own show on WAOK in Atlanta every Sunday from 1 to 4 Eastern Standard Time. He's also the Southeastern Regional Director of Rainbow Push. I want to hear from you, everybody. What about this Justice in Policing Act? What is in it? And what do we need? What do we need? Attorney Mark Fancher, your thoughts?
Well, it's a complicated situation on a number of different levels. The component parts of the legislation are things that certainly won't hurt, but at the same time, they're not things that are going to resolve the problem. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is much ado about a bill or legislation that was intended most likely to make it appear as though politicians are addressing a serious problem and that they're doing something that's meaningful, when really, in my view, they're not. In the first place, a number of the policies that are part of the legislation are already part of the policies of many individual police departments anyway, such as no use of chokeholds and things like that. But the most meaningful aspect of the legislation, which involves qualified immunity, is the part that is creating for many the biggest roadblock to actually getting this passed. And even if it is passed, it doesn't really fully address the problem. For those who don't understand what qualified immunity is or what it means, basically it means that if a police officer is accused of having engaged in some type of misconduct or excessive force, that police officer is not subject to being sued, that this police officer enjoys immunity, that he does not have to worry about being sued individually for having engaged in this misconduct. And what people are saying is that, if you eliminate this immunity and make them subject to lawsuits, then, they will reform their own conduct, that they will change their own conduct. The problem with that now is that, already police officers can be sued, but qualified immunity is offered as a defense. And you can overcome that defense if you can establish a couple of things. One, that the officer's conduct did violate a constitutional right. Usually it's the Fourth Amendment when you're talking about excessive force. And you determine whether they've used excessive force by looking at whether whatever they did would be regarded as reasonable conduct from the perspective of a reasonable officer who is facing the same situation. If you can do that, then you have to move to the next phase of the analysis, which is to determine whether whatever that right was that you're claiming was violated was clearly established in the context of that case. And what that means in practical terms is that many officers are able to still use qualified immunity even when it's been established that they've engaged in what would be regarded as excessive force, because they're able to make some sort of distinction between what they have done and anything that might have been done in the past. So, for example, if a police officer beats a suspect using a flashlight and beats him bloody, if he's able to say, well, I'm the first one who's ever done this using a flashlight. Yes, there are other cases where police officers have used batons, or they've used shoes, or they've used rocks, or they've used other things, but I'm the first one who has used a flashlight. Then, they may be able to establish to the satisfaction of the court that they had no way of knowing that using a flashlight to beat somebody violated a constitutional right, that what they did was not clearly established as a violation of that right, and therefore they still enjoy qualified immunity. So that's what's so troublesome to so many people about qualified immunity that, it's really sort of an illusory kind of a safeguard against, officers getting away with things when in fact they're still able to invoke it, as a practical matter because of this clearly established requirement, for overcoming it. But let's assume that all of that is overcome. Let's say that you are able to still sue a police officer. And not only do you sue the police officer individually, but you win. And you come back with a verdict that is, 6 or 7 figures, a huge amount of money. As a practical matter, that means nothing to the police officer in many cities, if not most cities, because the cities agreed to indemnify the officer. In other words, even though the judgment may be against the officer for lots and lots of money, the city comes back and says, well, that's not coming out of the officer's wallet. That's not coming out of his bank account. We're paying the judgment out of the municipal treasury. The taxpayers are paying for it. And so the officer, as a practical matter, still comes away unscathed. So if all that you do is eliminate qualified immunity, you've only traveled partway down the path that needs to be followed. You also need to have safeguards or rules or laws which prevent the indemnification of the officers once judgments are assessed against them or are imposed against them, or when settlements are reached which involve some implication of liability on the part of the officers. So it's imperfect, in terms of remedy. There's a lot more that could be done and should be done to address the police violence problem that this bill doesn't accomplish. But making a lot of fuss about it, agitating about it, makes a lot of people feel good, makes them feel like we're really doing something, when the problem is really, in my view, rooted in what you made reference to earlier about the culture of policing. You can impose all of the laws and rules that you want, all of the guidelines that you want, but if the culture of policing is such that police officers are still going to engage in this misconduct, which they do, even in departments where there are very good, strong guidelines, good progressive guidelines, then you really have not gotten to the root of the problem.
Reverend Dr. Todd Geary, your thoughts?
Well, Attorney Fancher has really kind of laid out in great detail the qualified immunity challenge. There are some other things, though, that I think kind of speak to the issue. The approach to the legislation is really to get to a couple of things that addresses the last point. I think it's the culture. One is a uniform use of force standard that would have to be adopted by police departments, because the real benefit of the federal law, other things that are included in it, use of force, no-knock warrants, the qualified immunity piece is an important one that is often given or guaranteed in terms of the indemnification by collective bargaining. It's in the police union contract. The big challenge, though, is that federal dollars often go to these local departments. Equipment is often provided for to local departments. Those would then be contingent upon the states adopting whatever the principles are and the standards are that will come out in the legislation. It's going to be far short from perfect, but certainly it will at least give you some continuity and maybe some uniformity in terms of how police departments are evaluated. The other part that we have to remember is a lot of these issues that are coming up, and Attorney Fancher mentioned it in his remarks, is that when we talk about violations of federal constitutional rights, those thresholds are usually hard to get to when a lot of the challenges you're looking at occur under state law. Now, some state laws have similar language in their state constitutions to the federal constitution for unreasonable search and seizure and the like. But a lot of these issues that we're seeing in these departments, Minneapolis, Louisville, Kentucky, Baltimore, where we are currently under a consent decree. New Orleans was under a consent decree. Chicago would have been under a consent decree had there not been a change in administration. And so the state attorney general stepped in to create kind of a state version. The reason we see all of this, seemingly whack-a-mole-ish, if that's a word, behavior is because policing is so nuanced to the particulars of the state and the approach. And so the effort, and I think this is also contributing to the gridlock, is to create some uniformity and some accountability, even at a baseline level. Creates a lot of angst depending on which side of the aisle you're on, and that's pun intended in deference to my colleague Robert Patillo. So I think that's the thing that we've really got to understand what the legislation is intended to do. When we get to a piece of legislation, what will it reasonably do, and how much work will be left for folks to do? And bear in mind, all of this could actually be modified in real time, depending on what the current mix of the Supreme Court might do for any case involving policing that might come before it. Qualified immunity, by the way, is not a legislative framework. It's really a legal fiction that the Supreme Court kind of created in rendering one of its decisions, this notion that police officers who make reasonable mistakes, that's the reasonableness standard. So police officers have this unique way of thinking that doesn't apply to anybody else. And if they are kind of doing what police officers normally would reasonably do, even if they're wrong, then they're viewed to be immune personally, even though the police department or the municipality might be found to be liable, under this, notion of responding superior, right? The boss is responsible for the employee's actions because they are ultimately responsible for their behavior. That's the kind of stuff that we're in. It's very convoluted and complicated. But the issue is what we don't want to come away with is absolutely nothing, because basically that's going to leave no constraints, and you'll end up having to do more of the pattern and practice investigations for which the Justice Department will not have the bandwidth to do the numbers of investigations that are actually required to get changed. We will, though, I think, have a champion in that regard, because on yesterday, while we did not get a bill, we did get the confirmation of Kristen Clark to head up the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, which I do think is going to be a big asset to have someone who is looking at this and following up on this to try to get some change while we're waiting on legislation.
And she will be busy because the cases continue to roll in. We're going to hear from Attorney Robert Patillo on the other side of the break, and from you, 773-763-WCPT. 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. Who should pay when police officers hurt someone, kill someone? Should it be the citizens, or should it be the police union? Should it be the police officers themselves? Should they take out insurance plans? Well, you have to do that when you drive, right? And if you have too many accidents, you can't get insured. You might not be able to drive. I mean, just think about these things. Where are we? Why has this George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, why is it stalled? What's happened with Black Lives Matter support? Because everybody was really feverish about this. We turned the corner. That's what we said last year. Not so fast.
Out in 15.
More of the Santita Jackson Show on WCPT 820 and on AM 950 Radio, Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's back in just a few minutes. All right, I'm coming to you, Robert, before I go to the callers.
All right, sounds good.
All right. That's right. Oh, man, you got to see this video of Robert's. It is hilarious. Hilarious. He said, for my daily chuckle. Oh, my gosh. Thank you. Thank you for my daily chuckle. But that is rich, Robert. You should do more of that.
I'll work on it.
Yeah, from the left and from the right. Right? That's right. From the left, it was so creative. I loved it. I'm telling you, I loved it. It was just, I said,
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Just as crazy as he can do. What's he doing? You guys, I was not ready for that yesterday. Was not ready for that. But thank you all so much for being with us today. I'm looking at all these. Okay. All right. Let me do that. Let me move this up. They might have a diabetes vaccine. How about that? That would be a game changer. Woof. That would be great. That would be great. So you guys, do you think that this is going to get passed? Or will a very, very watered down version of it be passed? What do you think before we come back on the air?
I think it's dead in the water.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Well, you'll come in with that. That's hopeful. Okay. Thank you.
And that's a shame too, you know.
Thanks. Okay. Oh boy. Yikes. Dead in the water. Okay. Candor next time, all right? Jeez. Oh, yeah. Are you surprised that Black Lives Matter support has gone down? It's plunged?
No, not at all. Dr. King's approval rating in before he was assassinated was right around 34-35%. So it's normal. America has a very short attention span.
Yeah. Also, they're getting hit from different directions. I mean, there are all the allegations of misconduct by, Black Lives Matter leadership, or at least the corporate entity that they established, as well as a lot of homophobia that has crept into it, and a lot of red baiting that's been directed at that too, claiming that it's a stalking horse for socialists or something like that. So it's being attacked on a bunch of different levels. Yeah.
Well, I think it would be very helpful if we knew, when you have personal relationships with people, it can go in different directions. I think it would be helpful if we knew them. You don't. It's it's faceless, and when it's like that, it's very, very hard to defend. You defend people,
1 minute.
not organizations as much. So, we'll see that. We'll see. So I'm trying to get this together. Okay. All right. Now I understand why these people are shuffling these papers when when you watch the news, when people are actually reporting news and not just reading a teleprompter.
30.
Yeah, I said it. And now I understand why they're shuffling papers around. Because there was a time when these guys actually wrote their own stories. Ooh, yeah, I said it. Okay.
15.
Static is back once I started to talk. Philip, we're working on it, honey. We're working on it. And I want to thank you so much for staying with us. But I know this is a lot for people. Oh, boy.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. We've been talking about the Justice and Policing Act here on WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and on the Santita Jackson and Friends page on Facebook, and the WCPT 820 page, and the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe, everybody, and meet me over on Instagram at Santita J. No, excuse me, at Santita Jackson IG. At Santita Jackson IG. On Twitter, I'm at Santita J. And there's a Santita J show. But go to at Santita J. That's the one I'm really active on, everybody. So the other will be closed shortly. But I'm going to go to the callers. But before we do, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this. Attorney Mark Fancher is a civil libertarian. Reverend Dr. Todd Dewey Esquire is a preacher, theologian, and vice president of Rainbow Push. You're the Southeastern Regional Director of Rainbow Push, and you're a civil rights lawyer. What do you think are the chances that the Justice in Policing George Floyd bill will be passed?
Well, I think the issue. I think the issue is that Republicans have they've allowed the police unions to dig their heels in, and they dug their heels in on this issue of qualified immunity. They are not going to allow their members to pay the payout for the torts they commit, and because that's the integral part, a big part of the difference between this bill and Tim Scott's justice bill from last year is the issue of qualified immunity. And the police unions, not only have they dug their feet in on qualified immunity, now they're against the bill altogether. And after the crime wave that hit America this year when police unions told their members to stop policing for half the year, and now public opinion is on their side, it's going to be very difficult to get them to move. So I think it's going to be hard to get this bill pushed through.
So, is there anything you think? Well, is there anything that you think should be changed in the bill? I mean, as you see it, I mean, that would give it some teeth. Because we're seeing that people are still being killed all across the country. Thank goodness for body cams. We're still trying to figure out what happened with Ronald Green. Well, we're seeing what happened with him down in Louisiana 2 years ago, a year before George Floyd. I mean, this is in the culture. Can any bill change the culture or shift things around? I mean, Dr. King did say, hey, wait a minute. You know, laws don't change hearts, but they do make it illegal for you to do things. And it compels you to do others.
I think they're absolutely could have, because this is the most tepid, watered down dressing around the concept of police reform, and that can't even get past a 50-50 split Congress. It could do
763 WCPT. Should it be passed by May 25th? That didn't happen. Ron from Naperville. Ron, what's on your mind? Okay, is Ron still there? I have a lot of questions, Robert, and holding on to it. Attorney Mark, why?
Individual police officer word crimes loosely. I mean, the general idea behind do their jobs, then they have to do some things, making arrests, they have to rough people, have to get a little bit physical. They have to do things that if an ordinary citizen did them, would result in their being liable for assault or battery or whatever it might be. But if you're having an encounter with a citizen and a police officer has to do, a reasonable police officer would have to get there to impose liability on them or to make them responsible. As a practical matter, what you see is that it has been used to excuse examples of excessive force. It's been abused. It's important to many people to get rid of it, but at the same time, police unions and the police officers themselves, they don't want to lose the thing that has shielded them, has protected them from even being found. They're concerned that if qualified immunity is that municipalities and the citizens who now more and more police officers' judgments are being returned against them, more settlements are having to pay for this. No, we're going to, start our own. The public foot the bill, and so they're gonna.
Across the story coming out of on June 24th, 2016, this gentleman had arrived, and when he took off his dress shirt and remained in his vehicle to make a black man with dreads wearing a white T-shirt. He doesn't have dreads, everybody. And the police arrived on the scene of a fight, but they did spot him in his car. The canine, the dog handler, was to show that Baker complied with the police yelling at him and the dog barking at him. And this is a grandfather within the car. With him being attacked by the dog's mouth handcuffs him, but first kicks him 3 times. You have the district.
Well, the unions do. There's a lag time earlier this week in the gun trace task force case in Baltimore. There were probably 350 years of sentences given. And so I think what is that police officers not only get special treatment, they really get an exclusive treatment that no one else really enjoys. And when we look at what happens to regular everyday people when they get caught up in this, are often excessive, often punitive, and if they take a plea, the plea is not usually that generous when it comes to state law. I think when folks they get caught up in the system, they're like, look, something of the police incident that's going to lead to.
Hi. Obviously, I think they should pass the act, but I have a couple questions about the act. Is there anything in there when they open?
And Todd?
Legislation addresses this, but the question of police officer historically have been referred to as grabs, pretty much most of policing, but department to police department, no, this officer's in reform discussions. I don't know whether you need to weed out the officers with a demonstrated history of bad acts.
Absolutely. Let me go to you.
Proposed legislation that there would be a registry for police misconduct at the federal level, that any officer that has a charge levied, it would have to go into the database. Would you be able to use that for the judge in the interest of the accused, not necessarily in the right?
Do you think that?
The emotion says yes, but it's a fair trial, not necessarily that the public gets a fair trial.
Interesting. Brad?
One of the people on your Republicans are going to oppose any police reform, and that's difficult at best. I think what the Democrats need to do and say to get out to the people for 2022. The Republicans have shown their true colors. The only way you're going to get it is by superior numbers in the House and Senate. If what your panelists, which I have a feeling it is, these acts that police keep doing will keep inflaming people, and we have to make sure it's sufficiently enraged to go to the polls and to vote for this, because it affects everybody. I and my wife, that police brutality leads, I believe, to more crime. I feel it's not unwarranted. More crime against everybody because people just get enraged for that. And I'll take my comments off there.
Well, and I hear you, Brad, but it's not just a partisan thing. The author of the police incident was Joe Biden, Senator Biden. So, Robert Patillo, what do you think about that? Republican, Democrat fight. Because you have a lot of conservative Democrats and a lot of Democrats, period. They take particular risks in Patillo.
Well, we have to look at that are currently out there and their ability to shape policy. We saw last summer that the minute that many police accountability, you saw police slowdowns. You saw mass sick-outs. In Baltimore, 700 officers down. In Atlanta, 300 officers down. Commensurate spike in violent crime. What has been the Cassia Belli to kind of torpedo this national police reform? Because the number one duty that public officials have is to keep the community safe. And when people don't feel safe, they will get behind any draconian measure they think will make them safe. So it's going to take a lot of work on the parts of Democrats and upon the part of police reform advocates to get the message out to the public that it's not about chaos or anarchy or having a lawless society. It's just we want the same good old-fashioned policing that Andy Griffin did will have a knee on her neck. And I don't think that's too much to ask for regular policing without having to get shot every once in a while. And I think once people can understand that concept that it's not about trying to get rid of police or being anti-police, but pro-good police, then that's when you can get some movement on the legislation.
Everybody, because, Attorney Fancher, when I see the case of this white St. Paul, Minnesota police officer, you had they were together against, they were investigating one guy who was in his car. One police officer sets the dog on the guy, on Mr. Baker. The dog is clamped and is biting his leg. Now, if a dog has his teeth in your leg, I don't think you're going anywhere. I really don't. And then the other police officer, a kid, Mark, kicks him in his ribs with such force, not only could they hear it on the body cam, but he broke his ribs and collapsed both of his lungs. What is the thinking behind that?
Well, it's what I refer to as a manifestation of white boy culture. And, I think that, all males have a culture which has all kinds of problems, but white boy culture has an additional problem because it contains a healthy element of arrogance that's brought on by privilege that they enjoy within the society. And it's fueled by too much macho, too much testosterone, and it's made even worse, in situations like at frat houses where there's too much consumption of beer, there's too much racism in it, there's too much homophobia in it, there's a lot of stuff in it. And you get a bunch of these guys together, whether it's in a frat house or on a football team or, on a police force, and bad things happen. The last thing that they want to do is to come off as being soft or wimpish. They want to impose and exercise and flaunt their authority that the society tends to celebrate. And so when you get a situation where you've got someone who is regarded as a subordinate or who is an inferior, particularly relative to them, then they need to really show it. They need to demonstrate it. So it really permeates police culture. And it's made worse even by the way in which policing is done in this country. We have the soldier cop. I mean, these officers are trained essentially to be a paramilitary force. They know how to shoot. They know how to knock people around. They know how to grapple. They know how to put people in cuffs. They know how to taser. They know how to do all kinds of warlike kinds of things. And then they're set loose on the streets and told to go respond to traffic violations. They're told to go and deal with people who are suffering from overdoses of narcotics. They're told to deal with people who have mental health crises. They're told to deal with situations that require a delicate mediation of, domestic disputes or disputes between neighbors. And these soldiers, who are products of white boy culture and arrogant violence, go into these situations least prepared to deal with much of what they're called upon to deal with. The number of times that you need a soldier to respond to these situations is minimal compared to the number of times that you need somebody who is really trained to go in and to offer psychological counseling or drug counseling or mediation or any of a number of other things. And so I think that when we talk about police reform, we need to take it out of the realm of national electoral politics where it will go to die. It's really more a reimagining of what emergency response is all about what public safety is about. And so when you hear people talking about defunding the police, many times that's what they're referring to. They're talking about taking money away from these soldier cops and redirecting that money to professionals who are able to actually respond most effectively to the real life, real world kinds of crises that local communities experience. And so much of that can take place on the local level and doesn't necessarily need to extend to national legislation.
Maybe they should have talked about refunding the police, rerouting the funding of the police. I think that would have settled on people's ears just a little differently. Very quickly, Maine, what's on your mind, sweetie? Maine, I need you to turn the radio down in the background. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, turn that off, sweetie. Okay.
All right.
Okay, Maine, I got a minute. Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I see it. It's like the overseers back in the days of slavery, and how they made it. They would make examples out of black people, the slaves, in order to put fear in the other slaves. And this is what they were doing with Floyd. He was doing that fear tactic thing, letting the people in the neighborhood see what could happen to them if they get in this man's way. And so it's a thing of where I see overseers, that overseer attitude that's been with them since the days of slavery, and that's something they will have to change. Yeah,
no question.
and they're gonna have to admit that too.
Well, you know,
that they have that slave type of overseer type mentality when it comes to the black man, or the black woman, or child.
You know, and
it
brown
doesn't
people,
matter.
and
They shoot them all.
whoever is vulnerable in the society, this is what they do. I've got 30 seconds for you, Reverend Dr. Yeary.
Well, the politics are real. Here's the issue why you're going to have a hard time getting the bill through. You've got 34 Senate seats on the grid for 2022. 20 of them are Republican. 5 of those Republican seats are open seats in states where you could possibly have a contest. They are leveraging to an electorate because they're looking forward to taking
1 minute
the chambers in the Senate and the House in 2022, and that's what this posturing is all about.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds. You know, you do radio, Robert Patillo. Your closing thoughts. You know what, everybody? I want you to continue to check out WCBT throughout the day. Of course, Stephanie Miller comes on after I do, as does Tom Hartman and Jody Esposito in the afternoon. And our podcast, WCBT820.com/Santita. That's the show without all the commercials. Can't wait to be with you tomorrow. We've got a lot to talk about on Friday. We're going to be going over Tulsa as we go into this Memorial Day weekend. And we're going to be talking about Memorial Day. Did you know that Memorial Day is actually a holiday that was created by African Americans to honor the war dead from the Civil War? The Memorial Day was created by black people, black Americans. Can't wait to be with you on the Santita Jackson Show, everybody. God bless you. Have a great day. Love you much. All right, everybody. I love you. Mark Fancher.
All right.
Reverend Dr. Yeary. Robert.
Thank you.
Okay. Love you,
Yeah.
love you.
Always a pleasure.
Oh, you all are great. I'll be prevailing upon you in the next day or so. So have a wonderful rest of your day. Be on the lookout for texts from me, all of you.
All right.
We have a lot to talk about in the next couple of days because I do want people to understand what Memorial Day is, what the origins of it were, and of course, this is now coming smack dab in the middle of the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa massacre and bombing. I think we need to not call it a riot. It was a massacre and it was a bombing. This was the first aerial bombardment on American soil. That did not happen in Hawaii, which was a territory. It wasn't even a state then. It happened on American soil, and it was white Americans who bombed black Americans. When you heard the people testifying last week, particularly the eldest, our elder, I forget this beautiful woman's name. She said she remembers hearing the airplanes flying overhead. They took World War I planes. They were given permission to rain those bombs down on people. And you need to understand that it was 10,000 white Tulsans who rained down on black Tulsa. 10,000. So this was not just some little riot, some sticks, and what. No. These people came to wipe these folks out, and that is what they did. Oh, but the blood, the power of the blood. I think I got a preacher on here with me. Oh, unearned suffering is redemptive. Oh, Pastor, say something to us about this before we go. You just got hit in my spine.
Well, Viola Fletcher is the sage's name who said, "All I want is justice." She was 7 years old at the time. 100 years later, at 107, she's reliving that moment. And it was not just against black people. It was against the show of black economic power. So the Greenwood section of Tulsa was a very affluent section. That this notion that somehow or other black people are always limited in terms of their economic possibility and how they think in entrepreneurial ways is actually anathema to what the history is, which is a big deal today. And so that's why we have to tell this story. When you can't get tenure at UNC for the 1619 project, but you can have an administration produce the 1776 report, which basically sanitizes American history to protect the fragility of the white psyche. It is problematic on its face. And so in honor of the courage of this 107-year-old survivor, we've got to go back to Tulsa and we've got to tell the story, come what may, because at the end of the day, the African adage is those who go into the invisible realm are not dead until there's no one left to call their name. We're going to go call their name to keep their memories alive and to make sure that we never forget just how violent this country not only can be, but has been, with public sanction, to be able to do harm to Black people and other communities of color.
Absolutely. Amen to that. And so we're going to talk about that, Mark Fancher, and I want you and Reverend Dr. Uri to be in on that conversation. We've got to talk about it. I will be in Tulsa on Sunday and Monday with Reverend Jackson. I have the honor of being able to sing at a couple of ceremonies there. But we have got to call their names. This woman said, I want justice. I want justice. That's why I want us to, we got to rename this. This was not a riot. Yeah, it had aspects. It was riotous, but it was a massacre. It was a planned massacre. And it was a bombing. It was the first aerial bombardment on American soil, and it was done by white people on Black people. White Americans bombed Black Americans. That happened here 100 years ago this weekend. Over an 18-hour period. Oh my gosh, yes.
The one thing that's interesting is that if we had to look at what happened in the Greenwood section through the lens of today, it wouldn't even be called a riot. It would be called a tour.
How about that? Did I just hear you say so? Was that you, Mark?
Yeah. No, just.
I've been with you long enough.
I don't know what to say.
But you know what? What you say is you tell your children the story. Too many of our children don't know the story. I took an Uber about 2 years ago. I was on my way over to my brother's home because Yusef and Jonathan do the barbecuing, bless their hearts. And I got in the car and I was running late, but my crisis is not going to be your emergency. And it was a nice young man, and he said, this is my last ride of the day. He couldn't have been 25. He had a 7-year-old daughter, and he had a 7-year-old niece. He said, this is going to be it for me today because my two babies, my daughter and my niece, it's their birthdays. And we're having a party. He was so excited, and I was excited for him. A little slight African-American guy, locks, handsome. And I said, I got to give him a nice tip because I want, bless his heart. He was trying to make as much money as he could so he could go be with his baby. And as I got out the car, I said, young man, because we had been talking, I said, did you know that Memorial Day was created by Black people? His whole body posture changed. Literally, he straightened up in his seat. He said, ma'am, what do you mean? And I told him the story. I said, when newly emancipated African Americans saw that white Union soldiers had been tossed in a trash heap, they pulled them out of these mass graves and they gave them individual graves. And they had a parade. And they had a mass, respectful, loving ceremony, funeral for them. I said, Black people created Memorial Day. He said, ma'am, I didn't know that. And it was like Mark and Robert and Todd, a light went off in his head. He said, I can't wait to tell my daughter. She's got to know that. Where can I find the information? And I gave him some links. But when we know our nobility and just how noble we've been and how Black people came out of slavery fighting and looking for husbands and wives and children, don't tell me that Black fathers are not participants in their children's lives. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention made that a lie in 2014 or 2015. They said the most involved father in America is the Black father, whether he's with the mother or not. These men went looking for their wives, who they were not allowed to marry. They went looking for their sons and their daughters and their families. That's what they did. And wives did the same. And children did the same right after slavery. And we walked out of slavery determined to make it. We created Tulsa's, the Gap Band, thank you, Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. But and every time we created something and moved forward, as Dr. Julianne Malveaux, economic envy took over and our communities were destroyed. Black people have been fighting and pushing, and yet we still rise. We are not defeated, but we have been, Mark and Robert and Todd, it's been a painful journey. But I think that we have Reverend Turner, who is establishing a prayer wall. The historic Vernon AME Church in Tulsa, in the Greenwood section. That wall and their basement survived. So he's creating a prayer wall, like you have the prayer wall over in the Middle East, over in Jerusalem. He said, no, we need a prayer wall here, a prayer wall of racial healing. And so we're going to be there because I'm going to have him on so we can support him in his efforts to create this prayer wall. And we need to pay for it. We don't need to find a grant. We need to pay for it. It's our wall. We ought to be proud that that wall in that basement of that church survived. We need to pay for it, Reverend Urey. Everybody.
Yeah, well, it is often said that suffering is redemptive, and in at least that respect, I think that African people are unique in terms of the level of suffering that they've had to endure, and I do think it's for a reason. I think that we've been charged with a special mission to show the rest of humanity how to be human beings. No other people could have endured what we've endured. No other people have had to go through what we've had to go through and have emerged from all of it with their backs as straight and their heads held as high as ours. So it is a unique population that we belong to with a unique mission that I think God has given us. And the question always is, are we up to the task? And so far we've demonstrated it, but there are times when it starts to look like maybe we are getting off track a bit, and that's when we need to nudge ourselves and get back on it.
Absolutely. You sound like my mother. My mother said if God wanted us on top of that Mayflower, that's where he would have put us. He put us in the bowels of the slave ship. There's a mission that we're on, and we need to know that. We need to see the nobility of our ancestors. Stop telling. I don't want to hear anyone else say to me, Mark or Todd or Robert, well, if I were alive then I wouldn't have. I said, how dare you insult the ancestors? They absorbed, they took, they fought back, they did everything they could so that you could get here. So don't you tell me about what you wouldn't have taken.
And that's the other big lie that disturbs me. I mean, I tell everybody who says that to read a book that John Hope Franklin wrote called Runaway Slaves. And everything that people imagine that they would have done, when you read that book, you see that not only did our ancestors do it, they did far more than we even imagined in terms of their level of resistance. There is nothing more that I can think of that anybody could have done to resist. I mean, including the most violent of resistance, the most passive of resistance, the most strategic to the most blind. I mean, everything an oppressed person could think of to do, they did.
Absolutely. And we keep doing it. Because the people who say that will not participate in one march today. You wouldn't have marched with Dr. King then. Everybody who says they marched with Dr. King, they're not telling the truth. Dr. King was in the minority. He could not even get in a pulpit, a black pulpit, from coast to coast. And those who hosted him paid a terrifically high price, like my pastor, Reverend Clay Evans. They wouldn't let him finish building his church. So stop it. Start honoring those. Honor the indigenous people who survived. Don't look at these people on the reservations and say, oh my goodness, look at them. No. Look at what they have survived. Look at what they're trying to plow through. Look at what black people are trying to plow through and what we have gone through, what we have grown through, what we've been through, and who we are today. God bless us. God bless us. So we'll be in Tulsa. I'll be in Tulsa, and I'm looking forward to being there. And we're going to be talking about Tulsa and Memorial Day and all of that in the next couple of days so that we can understand really the history of our holidays. It matters. What they call provenance, where things come from, where they began. We're trying to find that out about coronavirus, about COVID-19. Where things began, that's where they matter. What's past is prologue. You need to know. You need to know Tulsa. Everybody needs to know Tulsa. You need to know Tecumseh. You need to understand the Trail of Tears. Because all of that is why we're here. Anybody have any closing thoughts? Robert, are you still there?
Yes, ma'am.
Your closing thoughts.
Well, I think it's important for us to keep the pressure on Congress. We do have an intransigent U.S. Senate, but we have to keep the pressure up because many of them live in swing districts. Also, you have the demographic advantage, which they need to have the electoral advantage, and we've seen crazier things pass through the Congress with large majorities. And I think that once we can get the focus back on what the real issue is, then we can push through some form of police reform.
Mark Fancher, your closing thoughts?
No, I just think that we need to continue to pray and to think creatively and expansively about what we want to see with respect to policing, thinking way outside of the box and looking at the real needs of our communities, and looking at the serious problem of police culture and the ways that we can make differences. I think that the one thing that everybody can do, in light of all the resistance that's put up to the discipline of police officers by police unions, the one thing that can be done by communities is to celebrate the work of the good police officers. So I think that civic groups, fraternities, sororities, churches, whatever organizations, if they know that there are individual police officers who are doing the right thing and who are doing it the way that they want it done, make sure that those officers are celebrated and that their police chiefs celebrate them too, because that sends a message to the rank and file officers. They want to be celebrated. They want to be commended. They want to be rewarded. And so maybe they'll follow that example.
Reverend Dr. Uri, your closing thoughts?
It's real simple. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. And unless we have the courage to keep our demands front and center, we're going to always be in the position of negotiating against our self-interest. And so now's not the time to back down. If the numbers prove to be insufficient to get the kind of comprehensive reforms that we need, then we keep the demand going until we get the numbers that are in our favor.
Amen to that. Everybody, I think nothing else needs to be said. I love you all. Can't wait to be with you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. My love, my love, my love to you, Reverend Dr. Uri, to you, Attorney Fancher, and to you, Attorney Robert Patillo, and to you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. We're working on the sound. We're going to get it right. Love you. God bless.